Hey everyone, David Ryshpan with you here again on YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. This is either going to be the last video of 2024 or the first video of 2025, depending on when I get this online. Either way, thank you all so much for tuning in over the past year. It's been an amazing year of growth on this channel. It's really heartening to see so many people getting use out of the lessons that I've posted either this year or even previously. It's been great to have conversations about the videos I've been posting, both here and the excerpts on Instagram. So again, thank you all for tuning in over the past year. I got a question in the comments of the last video from Eric O about my process in preparing for gigs. And I realized that I have addressed different parts of it in different videos, whether it's been more gear related or more practice time related, but I never made a video detailing the process from start to finish. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is my step-by-step process of how I prepare for gigs. If you enjoy the content on this channel, please click like and subscribe. It really does indeed help the channel. So just click all the little buttons below the video. All right, let's get into it. So obviously my process of preparing for a gig is dependent on what type of gig it is. I guess that's a self-evident thing to say. But the two variables that change, or the two variables that determine how I invest my time or where I need to invest my time in preparation are: is there sheet music? Are there charts already? And is it a sound-heavy gig? I think the best way to explain my process is to use 3 different gigs as examples, and I'll sort of talk through my process on each one. The first gig that I'll detail is, I guess, what you would call a straight-ahead jazz gig that I was just offered a week or so ago. And I know for a fact that there is no sonic preparation for that gig. Everything will be on acoustic piano, maybe Fender Rhodes if we want to really electrify the Chick Corea tune that's in the set list. But otherwise, everything will be acoustic piano, and there's an acoustic piano at the hall where we are performing. So I don't need to bring equipment. I don't need to worry about equipment. I don't need to make equipment choices. That was a question Eric O asked about, what are my equipment choices? So I don't need to worry about gear. The piano is there. It's a piano gig. That part of the equation is taken care of. So really my focus is all on the tunes, learning the tunes. Many of them I have not played. I've heard them, but I haven't actually ever learned them. So that's where my focus is for that gig. That gig is in February. So one thing I spoke about in the how do I split up my practice time video that I made months ago, I work backwards from the deadline. So I know that that gig is in February, and I know that we'll probably only rehearse in the end of January. So that gives me time to really get my brain and my fingers around the music, especially because one or two of those tunes are quite technically challenging for me. They have written material that is pretty up-tempo and very specific. So there are technical challenges that I need to come to grips with. And so that's why I'm already starting on it now in the end of December 2024 for a gig that's in February, to give myself enough time to get acquainted with the material and have the technical facility to execute the material by the time we rehearse, whenever, end of January, beginning of February. thing that really helps me structure my preparation time is working backwards from the date of the first rehearsal, or if there's no rehearsal and I'm showing up to the gig, the date of the gig. So if I have 4 weeks, 1 month to learn this music and program this music, and there's 20 tunes to learn and program, I know I have basically 20 days to get everything solid, 1 tune per day, and then 10 days to run everything and get stuff together. And that also leaves leeway for life to get in the way, you know. But that's how I think about it, is I really try to work backwards from the day I need to have everything prepared and together. And that lets me tackle it in more manageable chunks. Because if you look at a list of 20 or 30 tunes, it can get overwhelming really fast. But if you think about it of, I only have to learn 1 tune today, I only have to program 1 tune today or 2 tunes today, then that's a lot easier to tackle, at least for me, than, oh my God, where do I start with these 30, 40 tunes that I have to learn in a month? So the second gig I'll use as an example was a gig I did last week with the Kalmunity Vibe Collective. Kalmunity, for those of you who don't know, is a collective dedicated to improvised groove music. I spoke about them in the last video. They've been going since 2003. It used to be every Tuesday night up until the beginning of the pandemic. And it was 2 sets every Tuesday night of improvised Black music. R&B, soul, hip hop, reggae, house, all of those genres and other genres as well, all improvised with a rotating band every week. And that lasted for 16 or 17 years, from 2003 until 2020. It has been slowly coming back for specific events, and this was my first time since the pandemic participating in a Kalmunity event. And it was a special one. It was done in conjunction with 6 contemporary dancers. And so we were given kind of a playlist of inspiration, a playlist that the dancers were also listening to kind of be on similar ground. It so happens that I knew 2 of the 6 dancers involved, which really helped. But in terms of gig prep, in that case, there's no written music to learn. There was kind of a playlist to absorb and become acquainted with, but we didn't have to be married to the playlist or learn any of those tunes specifically. So I listened to the playlist a couple of times just to get a sense of the harmonic language, the stylistic markers, the genre references that the dancers had been listening to. And that had much more emphasis on the sonic side of the preparation. I needed to have a large sonic palette at my disposal. That playlist was just kind of for everyone to have a certain set of common references in terms of where we were hoping the night and the set to go. And I was also the only harmonic instrument, or polyphonic harmonic instrument. The setup was keyboards, electric bass, percussion, and drums, and 2 vocalists, 1 rapper and poet and 1 singer and poet. So it was a pretty wide open playing field for me, and I had a lot of space that I could take up in that case. So in terms of sound preparation, I made the decision that I was going to use my laptop Mainstage rig because I wanted to have a lot of synthesizer colors available to me at the click of a button. My gear is my own gear, despite what you see in this studio. This studio is not my equipment. I have been renting this studio for the past year. This all belongs to the studio owner, to a friend of mine. So my rig is pretty lean and mean. My choices are my Nord Electro 5D and my Novation controller that you've seen in some videos, my Novation launch key controlling Mainstage with all kinds of plugins that I have shared with you throughout the past year or so. So I made the decision pretty quickly that I was going to go the laptop route, and I was going to prepare a bunch of different sounds. If I'll maybe get a screen grab of the Mainstage file that I built, but I subdivided it in 3 or 4 categories, which in Mainstage you can organize them as sets. So I had a set of pads, and there were maybe 4 or 5 different pads. There was a lot of kind of meditative, semi-ambient music in the playlist we were given. And so I wanted to have those colors available just in case the music went to a kind of more down-tempo place. I had a set of what I call bread and butter sounds, which are generally electromechanical keyboards, acoustic piano, Rhodes, Wurlitzer, clavinet, and B3. I can do most of what I need to do that is not synth on those 5 sounds. And if it had only been those 5 sounds that were required, I may have brought the Nord. But because there was synth, I wanted to lean on synth and have synth colors available to me. I decided to bring the laptop. So we had pads, we had bread and butter, and what I did was I also layered a couple of the pads under the Rhodes and under the acoustic piano, and I just had a slider on my controller mapped to mute, so I could bring in those pads underneath an acoustic piano or bring in those pads under the Rhodes if the improvisation called for that texture. Again, because I was the only harmonic polyphonic instrument, I could take up a lot of frequency range as well. The third set I had in my Mainstage were a few polysynth sounds, so synthesizer sounds that are polyphonic, that are more articulate than pads. Some of them have a synth brass quality, I guess. Anyway, if you look up polysynth in your plugin or your keyboard of choice, that's kind of the color I was going for, having a couple of flavors of polysynth available to me. And then the fourth set I had were splits. So Rhodes in the left hand and kind of analog synth leads in the right, analog synth brass in the left hand and a different analog synth lead in the right, a pad in the left hand and some other lead in the right, and kind of variations on those things. Rhodes with phaser in the left hand and a different lead in the right hand. So I have that split on my Novation controller, and I have it split through Mainstage, not through the controller. Mainstage is what determines the split, and that's how I set that up. So if I wanted to have Rhodes comping in my left hand, but to solo or play a melody, play a hook with a synth sound in my right hand, that was already set up and ready to go, and I could just pick and choose. When I use Mainstage Live in that situation, ideally, I prepare everything ahead of time and I get the mix more or less dialed in, and then I'll tweak it in soundcheck when I hear in the system how my levels are set. So I check my meters when I'm preparing the sound. I go by ear on the near field monitors that we have in the studio, but obviously the way a sound is going to respond in a much bigger system coming out of my radial key Largo is a little bit different than how it's going to come out of in the studio. We have an SSL2 Plus interface, and we have Yamaha near field monitors, which is a very different sound than coming out of, a Meyer sound wedge or a QSC speaker or whatever it is, right? So there's always some tweaking to be done, no matter how much prep you do in advance. I use Soundcheck to tell me where my levels are, where my EQ is, and then I kind of tweak the levels, and then hopefully during the set, all I'm looking at the screen for is the name of the sound, the name of the patch. So if I need to get to Rhodes, I make sure I'm on Rhodes. I double check the screen really quickly just to make sure that I'm there. And then that's it. I'm very rarely looking at the laptop screen, even in the most improvisational setting. So the third type of gig, which is I think what Eric is asking about in how I prepare for a gig, is what I'll call an artist gig. It is generally a vocalist or some artist, and I'm learning their tunes, whether that's a repertoire of covers or a repertoire of original music. And there's all kinds of variables within that. So I will try to summarize, and I'll try to detail where the variables occur. So the first stage is getting the gig, meeting the artist, learning who the artist is. At this point, it's very rare that I get called for an artist who I don't at least know who they are. So that, just in who the call is from, will tell me a lot about the sounds I need, the gear I need, whether gear will be provided if we're touring somewhere, whether there's backline or whether I need to bring my own equipment, whether it's covers or originals or a mix of both. And if there are covers, how faithful they want me to be to the arrangement and to the sonic fingerprints of those tunes. All of that is already on my radar just based on who's calling me. After 20 years in the Montreal scene, I have a pretty good finger on the pulse of a lot of artists, and I kind of know what they want, what they need. And if they're calling me at this point, they know what I can do and what I can offer them. So the first step is getting the tunes, whether that's getting a set list, getting a playlist on your streaming platform of choice, getting sheet music, whether that's just chord sheets or fully written out sheet music. So that's the first step, is getting the tunes together. Now, if I have to transcribe the songs, if there's no sheet music given to me, I will just listen to the set list. I will just listen to the tunes or watch the live video if it's a live video of the show on YouTube. And I will make notes about the sounds I need. So I go sounds first. Because again, if it's not a sonically intense gig, then I'll spend more time, and I know I have more time to spend on the notes. If it is a sonically intense gig, then I need to devote a certain amount of time into programming the sounds, collecting all the sounds, figuring out whether I bring both keyboards, if I can get away with just one keyboard, getting all that side of it together before I jump into the notes. So that's where I start. So I will start with the sounds, and then I will get into the notes. When we get to the learning the notes piece of preparation, if there's written sheet music, I can tell in the written sheet music, just by looking at it, if there's anything technically or rhythmically challenging that I'm going to have to give special particular attention to. And then those are the pieces, the excerpts I start working on first. So sounds, notes, and then I'll just run the tunes. I'll run the tunes if I have an order. If it's a set show and there's a set list that's already in place, I will run the tunes in order repeatedly. I'll listen to that playlist in order, even when I'm away from my keyboards, away from the piano. And I try to do, depending on when all the material is given to me, I try to take care of all this well before the first rehearsal. Sometimes the band leader does not provide the charts until a couple of days before the first rehearsal, and then depending on what else I have going on in my schedule, I may not be able to get to anything. Backtracking to the sounds piece of organization and prep, a big question is how married to the original sounds, how married to the original record is the artist. And that changes even if the set list, even if the repertoire is the same. There's one singer I work with in kind of the R&B soul scene who is very improvisational in the way she treats her set list and the way she treats the tunes. I know that the pianist who normally performs with her, the pianist that I sub in this case, he just plays bread and butter sounds, acoustic piano, electric piano, a little bit of B3. There's no synth in that sonic palette, even when they do songs that have synth parts. It gets covered on B3, it gets covered on Rhodes, and it's about the interaction of the vocalist and the band and the vocalist with the audience. It's not about recreating the productions of these songs. There's another singer in the same R&B soul scene who is a little more focused on the details, does prefer to have some of the sonic characteristics of the tunes, and especially when the set list leans more disco, wants to have strings, wants to have brass, wants to have synth, or at least that's an assumption I made when I subbed in. Again, I came in as a sub. I know the keyboard player in that case that I'm subbing is more adept with synthesizers and usually has a side of the original sounds, or at least similar sounds, involved when he does that gig. So coming in as a sub, my philosophy when I'm a sub is I don't want the band leader, I don't want the artist, I don't want the vocalist to even realize that there's a sub on stage. I want to play the gig the way that they're used to having that gig played. So I will get as close to the sounds that their regular keyboard player will use as I can with the rig that I have. And then the third level of detail, which is matching basically everything on the recording, which I find happens when you're playing with the original artist or when you're in a wedding corporate top 40 band, you want to get it as close as possible. With original artists, there's usually a lot of rehearsal before we go out on tour, or it's a band I've been playing in for a while. So we've discussed the sounds that are required, and I have those programmed and ready to go. For a wedding or corporate band or kind of a top 40 band, that's the most amount of work, the most amount of prep. And again, I will dedicate the majority of my prep time into the sounds of that, because the tunes I've probably played most of them at this point. So I hope that helps you in your own gig preparation. I hope that gives you some insight into how I do it. Let's have a discussion in the comments about how you work, how you approach your gigs. If you have any questions about what I'm using, how I'm doing these things, any other questions you want to ask me, let's have a discussion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. My name is David Ryshpan. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.